This is the magicwordpodcast.com.
Hello, this is Scott Wells for the magicwordpodcast.com. This week we're going to travel all the way around from the U.S. to the other side of the world in Adelaide, Australia, where we're going to get to visit with Raymond Crowe. Raymond is someone I visited with briefly when we were at Blackpool convention earlier this year, and I promised we would sit down for a longer chat, and I appreciate the time that he gave me, since there's such a difference in time zones between the two of us, for us to get together and have a proper chat here then today. And he is someone, if you've not seen him at Magic Live or perhaps a couple of other conventions or at FISM or wherever, he has appeared on television many times, as well as performing with the Illusionists on Broadway and other places around the world. And he's even been on the David Letterman show and a few other things that you may have seen him on. We discussed this a little bit into the podcast, so I don't want to give all of his CV right here. I think that you can listen to that as we get into the podcast. But I know you're going to get some good tips, some good advice from our guest here this week. So please welcome Mr. Raymond Crowe here on The Magic Word.
Good morning.
Today, we are going to be going down under, I guess you might say, in which we're going to be actually speaking with Raymond Crowe in Australia. He has appeared in The Illusionists. He's also been on the Royal Variety Show. He has won the Mandrake Award. He's been on the World's Greatest Magic in the United States on NBC. He has appeared also on the Late Night with David Letterman some years ago, and has also been not only on Australia's Got Talent, but also was an invited guest for America's Got Talent. He, of course, with The Illusionists, has appeared there in the Sydney Opera House, which probably is not too far from where he is. He has won the Creative Fellowship from the Academy of Magical Arts. He has been an invited performer and lecturer in FISM. His name is actually on the Walk of Fame, and he has appeared in Portugal then with Luis de Matos. And so my point is, I just want you to know about the international acclaim that my guest here has today. He is wonderful, and I spoke with him briefly when we were in Blackpool earlier this year, after he had given an amazing lecture, and I enjoyed that. And so I invited him to come on and speak for a little bit longer. So please welcome my friend here today, Raymond Crowe. Hey, Ray, how are you?
Very good, Scott. Wow, I've never heard all that before, what you said.
Well, I hope that you can live up to all that.
Oh, I don't know.
When you stop and think about the immensity of over a period of time, it's like, you're just kind of working along. Before long, gosh, you got a lot of things, you can eventually live long enough, And I forgot to mention, of course, about the shadowography that you do then as well, which is another whole thing. There are so many different areas that I would like to get into, and I do think that eventually during the time of our discussion we will get to. But one of the things I remember that Mr. Electric, Marvin Roy, had said that if you have a good silent act, you can work anywhere in the world. And that's something that you really have developed and honed to a perfection. I particularly like the idea that you had done with the zombie and the floating coat and the boa and everything and like that. And you had a wonderful lecture again in Blackpool and talking about the importance of how that you can emote with just a look and your smile and your face, and even all of the pictures that you're in. You can see that genuine affection, I guess, and you can see your spirit, your soul, I think, in the photos even that you take. So it's not just on stage. It seems like that you're always that way.
Oh, well, that sounds more impressive than what I am. No, I I think when we talked before, I think growing, because Adelaide is where I live, in Adelaide, South Australia.
Okay.
And although we have a major festival here of arts and a fringe festival each year, which now has many magicians coming. Like we just finished a couple of weeks ago here, the Adelaide Fringe Festival, and I think there was something like 20-something magic shows in there.
Is that the one that Tim Ellis is involved with also?
No. This is more like the Edinburgh Fringe Festival.
Oh, the Fringe Festival in Edinburgh, sure.
Yeah, it's the largest fringe festival in the Southern Hemisphere. It's
Wow.
massive for about 2 months. Anyway, but when I was growing up, it was very hard to see magicians. They only on TV when they'd turn up, and So I think in some ways it was a little bit of an advantage to sort of pursue your own way, I guess, because I wasn't able to see magicians all the time.
Hmm.
Unlike now, we can see them 24/7.
Well, they weren't on
So I
TV, I
think,
guess, so much back then. I mean, like, of course, I guess, saw Doug Henning. I guess that went
yes, yes,
international, and
yes, Doug Henning shows were available. They
David
came through.
Copperfield.
David Copperfield, and also the David Nixon show. There was some English magic shows
Hmm.
that would have been shown. And my favorite all time was a version of FISM, I think from 1971 or 73. Was a TV special that used to turn up on Sunday afternoons here in Australia on TV. And that's where I got to see Fred Capps and Richard Ross and Ricky Jay, a very young Ricky Jay. So they were my major magic influences when I was little. That when I was younger, that I could see, I guess.
And so
But
that
my
really
interest was all, sorry.
inspired you then to do more sleight of hand or stage or what?
Oh yeah. I really liked the idea of manipulation when I was younger,
Okay.
uh, but I also was brought up on Abbott and Costello movies and Fred Astaire movies, I
Hmm.
guess, from the 30s, and that they were always shown on again Sunday afternoons or something here in Australia. And so a lot of my work, pretty much, you can trace back to that sort of origin, I think, from those early films that I would have seen. I just like variety theatre, and I
Hmm.
like variety theatre from, I guess, if I was to choose, from the mid '60s back. I guess that's my that's my favourite time period
But physical
of
comedy is
entertainers.
something that you like a lot also then.
Yeah, yeah. I say I studied mime with a wonderful teacher here in Adelaide, Madame Zora Semborova, and she kind of introduced me or made me aware more of Charlie Chaplin. And so a lot of my work, you can see echoes of Chaplin, certainly in some of the body movements. I used to try to avoid doing them, but then I went, it's so much a part of me now. Why not embrace any echoes you have of other performers? They become part of you eventually. Yeah.
And so do you have a whole show or just a vignette that you do of Charlie Chaplin?
No, I only ever did a Chaplin show once with the symphony orchestra here. We got for a Christmas show.
Hmm.
It's actually on my Facebook page, some of it, and we got Chaplin's original music.
Wow.
So we got to choreograph a piece, and that was the only time I really did like an impersonation of Chaplin. When I say I absorbed his movements, there are gestures and there are attitudes that I've absorbed because I've just watched so much of it, I
Hmm.
guess. Yeah. And that also relates to any other silent movie, whether it be Harold Lloyd, Harry Langdon, or beautiful Buster Keaton. I admire them all and have lifted elements of them to use in my own work. Yeah.
When you said that you had taken classes then from the lady Zora, was her name?
Yep.
I assume that she must have been inspired similarly by some of those earlier actors that passed that on to you.
Yeah, she was no, she was more interesting. She was she had was an immigrant to Australia. She'd come to Australia on a holiday in 1968 when Czechoslovakia became communist, and she'd been quite outspoken, so she couldn't go home.
Hmm.
But she'd been an expressionist dancer in Prague and in Czechoslovakia. She was the first person to dance the role of Juliet in the Prokofiev score of Romeo and Juliet. So she was like anything but vaudeville. She
Hmm.
was legitimate theatre.
Theater, right.
So she had quite a hard time swallowing some of the people who would end up being more clown-like in her class. But she'd come to this country and realised that she'd been given a great opportunity. She was teaching at the university movement here. This is before I knew her, and wanted to give something back to the country. And she realised at that time there was nobody teaching mime in Australia. So she went to Paris, studied because she was a movement expert. She picked it up very quickly, and came back to impart it to Australian actors and students. And I ran into her in her retirement.
Hmm.
So I was a very fortunate man to
Had
find
she
such a
met or
dedicated
worked
person.
with Marcel Marceau?
Only more so. Sorry, I don't know. She, just to give you an idea of this woman, how strict she was, uncompromising. When Marcel Marceau played in Adelaide, she went backstage and gave him notes because he wasn't doing it right. And her attitude
Wow.
was,
Wow.
well, her attitude was, who will tell him? He's a big star. Nobody will tell him.
Right.
And she didn't believe in big stars. She just believed in doing good work. So,
I wonder how that interaction went. I would think he would have been
oh,
taken
probably
aback,
not
but
well.
yeah.
Probably not well.
Since he hadn't had anybody tell him anything different before.
Well, probably, but who, but that's the type of person she was.
Right.
She was honest in that regard. That if you don't know, you should be told.
You spoke about her
Because
briefly during your, well, at some length actually, in your lecture there at Blackpool. And for some people who may not have heard that, can you kind of recount at least some of the highlights on that?
oh well, she had when I met her, I was only 18, and I'd seen some magicians in Australia using whiteface at that time, and I'd never seen a mime artist. But I asked somebody why they wearing the white face. They said, "Oh, that's mime," and I thought I should learn it. So I literally opened the newspaper, and there was an advert for the Australian Mime Theatre, and I was working full time fixing telephone answering machines and photocopiers at that point.
Hmm.
And I thought, oh, I should learn another skill. That's what Daryl Fitzke says, and things like that. So I thought, okay, well, I'll learn another skill. And sorry, I should have said Henning Nelms. Henning Nelms is probably where I
Hmm.
read that. And and I rang her up, and I sort of made an indication that I may not be able to afford the time, and she let loose at me, telling me that children in her country work from 5 o'clock in the morning till 10 o'clock at night, and these lazy Australians couldn't even do 4 hours a week. And so I, guiltily I went along, um, but she changed my life and all my work, everything I do, from hand shadows through to any of the magic that anybody seen me do, all encompass the techniques that she imparted to me.
And so she's part
And
of you and also your thinking, I guess, and development of your routines.
yeah, yes. If you met any of her students, they all do an impersonation of her, but all with love and kindness because she
Hmm.
was so strict, and you don't normally meet those people anymore.
Is there a
Those big
group like that?
personalities.
Is there a group of
Big
people?
pardon?
Is there a group of people who were her students that you get together with from time to time?
No, only the only other one I'm really in contact was is another wonderful mime here in Australia called Glyn Nicholas. He became quite famous in the 80s here, uh, and he was wise enough to employ Madame, as we called her, to come and help direct some of the mime pieces in his work, as indeed I always encouraged her to have a look at my work and pull it apart. And it wouldn't necessarily always use what she said, but she was always made you think about things, how they could be clearer, or as she
Hmm.
said, things should always have a surprise in them. There should nothing should be uh, expected. It should be surprise. There should be a surprise in every moment.
So it sounds like that she, in a way, was teaching magic because that's what magic is about.
Very much so, and that's why in my lecture, and because we saw Paul Romani do his lecture about Chaplin,
Yes.
in my lecture I say, if you study those early Chaplin films, and I particularly say Chaplin because it's the beginning of film in your country,
Yes.
really in the world, and then Chaplin is before Buster Keaton and he's before Harold Lloyd,
Hmm.
and and he's direct from musical, direct from vaudeville, and he's approaching film in those early films just like a vaudeville act.
Hmm.
He enters the scene, he does something, there's interaction, a conflict, and he has to leave the scene because that's how they used to edit it. Person comes in from this side, he goes out that side, so they could cut them together. And as you watch him, you realize, A, that yes, he was a genius, because he's the first clown in history that can see himself,
Mm.
which is pretty remarkable. And he was smart enough, and he used writers as well. You don't really hear it, but there were certainly writers there helping. Um, and you get to see his construction of his gags. There's surprises. There's always a surprise, and that's especially then when you get along with Buster Keaton. Films have been being made for a while now, and they understand the language a bit more. And Keaton is wonderful with surprises. Things are never what you think they are. So I think for magicians to look at those, you can learn a great deal about construction and surprise. It's all. I see them very similar.
From start to finish, actually, that you can tell a whole story without actually using words.
Yeah, and just the structure, that they're using. A lot of it, if you look at Charlie Fry, that's a great example. Charlie Fry
Good
studied all
example.
these as well,
Yeah.
and he understands, structure and surprise and construction, and that's something that acts need to know. I mean, some people are naturals, of course, but I think in our world, we're not encouraged in the magic world to seek out writers or directors, and I think that's a great loss for our art, because your work can improve so fast.
Would that be a suggestion that you would make if someone was wanting to compete for FISM? In other words, you're competing on an international scale, basically. And what would you say to somebody as far as trying to develop an act?
Oh, I would say, yeah, I would. I always encourage people, if you're going to use a magician to help direct your act, I would only use them to direct the magic elements,
Right.
not the performance,
Hmm.
because not because there are some who certainly could do it, but we're more interested in the secrets and whether you can see it in your hand or not.
Hmm.
But a director or a choreographer is interested in the structure and the look, the shape of the act. And although a director won't add content to your work, they'll clarify it. And they'll just say things like, why do you have your table on that side? Oh, I always have it on this side. And they might say, well, if it's on that side, those people can't see you.
Right.
Or and so acts can be improved very, very quickly. And that's why with in your country with Charlie Fry, people should be beating his door down to get him to look at their act.
Yeah, I've
You
often
know,
said he's the new Johnny Thompson. He's someone, I believe, who knows it all.
he
He's very
does know it
humble
all.
about it.
Oh yes, he's humble, but because he's so well versed.
Hmm.
I can't sing his praises high enough. I think he's the likes of him we will never see again, because
Well,
he is our link to the past in many ways.
with the theatrical director, I guess you could find someone if you are near a university or even high school. Find someone, I think, who is out, as you suggest, then, Ray. I think if you have someone who is outside of our magic community, if you will, who is looking at it from a theatrical standpoint, can give you those kinds of points and tips then as well. And so I think it's important that you do have someone who gives you another viewpoint. I mean, you can record it, then watch yourself later. You can do it in the mirror, but there are so many different things that you were trying to do. I learned a long time ago from Mark Kalin about how that even if you think you can do everything, and you might be able to do things well, but you can't do it efficiently, you need to let other people who specialize in publicity, in theatrics, in choreography and music, let them do what they do and pay them for their skills. That will make you all the much better that you can devote your time then to making a more professional act and more cohesive.
Yeah, I 100%. I think of
Hmm.
David Copperfield. You know, always had people helping him. Was always wise enough to do that. And it's just if a lot of people are hungry for fame, I guess. I was
Mm.
never in a hurry. I just wanted to do good work. But if you are hungry for fame, then pay these people. That's their jobs.
Sure.
And I found also if there's a director that you admire, or if you see a show, contact these people. a lot of people will help you, at least give you the time of day,
Mm-hmm.
and put you onto something. They might have a student, they might have a friend, um, who might be able to help if they can't. But I do find that uh, that old saying, which again was one of my mime teachers, she told me, always surround yourself with the best, they'll pull you up. And mediocrity will always try to hold you down. That was hard for me to hear when I was 18, because all your friends from school may not be the best people to be running around with anymore. But I've always found that professionals, usually if they're far enough ahead, they'll always offer some help,
Mm-hmm.
or some advice. Why wouldn't they?
Well, if they're good friends, exactly. I mean, and they
Yeah.
wouldn't have to
Or
be good friends,
even
but
strangers.
yeah.
Even strangers. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
because somebody helped them. And I think eventually and the help might just be get a director, or, you know, or encouragement.
Right.
But always offer to pay. That's my other thing, is always offer to pay somebody.
That is true. I think there is a service that people offer, and a lot of times we don't give it the value that we think that it should have. So yeah, you're right. I think that you should. I was just talking with someone recently. I was talking with Mark Whitehouse, who plays Santa Claus, as I do during the holidays, and he was saying there are people who will go out and do Santa Claus for free, and he said that's a service that you can charge for, even though that you like doing it. And I think a lot of magicians are the exact same way. It's like I just love to do magic, even if I'm not being paid, but you're doing a service and it has value. And so I think that you should be charging for it. And likewise, that there is value for someone who is a theatrical teacher or director, or someone that, or a choreographer, or someone that can help you. And they might look at your show and give you a couple of pointers, but then I think it's important that you say, well, I want to pay you. How much is this going to be worth? So you just need to be prepared, I think, to pay if you want to go to that next level. And that's another thing when you were talking about you didn't expect necessarily to achieve fame. And I think that if you're looking for fame and monetary um, success, you're probably not going to reach it if those are your goals necessarily. I think that comes as a result of doing the best job you can.
Yeah, I mean, I want to earn money. I've never, and I want to keep, I just, for me, it was always about just keep working.
Hmm.
I think and that's the biggest secret too for anybody starting out. Of course, when you're starting out, you probably aren't worth very much money.
Correct.
And so why not do those charity jobs? But just get out there. You really just have to keep, it's the hours in front of an audience, and then uh, asking people, what did you think of it? I mean, sometimes it's very hard to hear, and with magicians, because we're such a solo
Mm.
performer, we spend all those hours rehearsing, working on everything and micromanaging everything ourselves, as you said. It's sometimes very hard to give over, to
Hmm.
actually admit that somebody could be of help. But I've always found it a fast process. And I too, I like to micromanage. I do everything,
Hmm.
everything myself if I
Hmm.
can. And it slows you up rather than speeds you up. What it does do is it does give you a lot of skills, of course, but you could be learning those skills from somebody else you're employing or working with. Um, so I would, yeah, just anybody at whatever stage of their career, bring somebody in, pay
Yeah.
for that moment. And also the good thing about buying a director, as I said in my lecture, is that you don't have to do what they say. You're paying for them, and
That's a
but
good
they
point.
might just awaken you to something you never considered,
Hmm.
and they can see you on stage, who you are, because who we think we are and how the audience perceives us are usually quite different, and they can find your strengths, and they can find, sorry, carry on.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think whenever that you're saying yes, that you should listen to you don't have to listen to what they're saying, no, you don't have to follow their advice, but I think you need to be open to it and then think about it, sleep on it, and decide, are they giving you good advice? I mean, because a lot of times as a performer, and you have spent so much time working with your act, with one thing, and you feel like, okay, this is it, and then someone is saying basically your baby's ugly, you know what I mean? That they say, no, I
Yeah,
don't
yeah,
care
yeah.
for this, and it's
Yeah.
hard to hear that, but maybe it is, and you should just be open to it, because I think there are some people who are just saying, no, I do it this way because, and they have lots of reasons or excuses as to why they're continuing to do that, rather than listening to someone who is trying to give them some good advice that would steer them in the right direction. So I'm just saying, yes, you can reject that, but I think also before you reject anything, I think you should be open to it. And I'm sure that the higher up you get in a particular field of whatever that might be, you're going to have people who are going to come to you, as Madame Zora did, and going back to Marceau, and saying, you didn't do that right. So you're going to be having people all along your life, I'm sure, who are going to be saying, here's a suggestion. And the better they get to know you, that the closer they think that they are to you, they can give you some personal advice. And I'm sure you've
Yeah.
had that happen too.
Yeah, don't surround yourself with yes men. You know,
That's my
that's the,
point. That's my
have some, of course.
point.
You need some, and that's the thing. I always thought with performing, I always thought, oh, I felt when I was younger, I felt less than the audience rather
Mhm.
than more than the audience, because I figured, well, they're the ones who actually are sitting getting the entertainment, and I'm the one who feels like I have to stand up here in front of you and be clapped. Because certainly when you first start, that's a very attractive element
Yeah,
of instant praise, and it's very seductive. You know, it still is.
of
I
course.
still enjoy when you do a good job and you get a nice response. That's job well done. You know, but eventually when it's your profession, then I think your attitude goes, yeah, okay, that's yes, that's I got that one right, and because not every audience is the right audience for you, so eventually you come a cropper on something, you realise, oh dear, that wasn't my audience, but I think for me now, as I'm certainly entering another stage of my life, age wise,
Mhm.
every performance seems to be, it was always important, but now it seems to be even more important to make sure that I've done the best I could for that group, because that's what they're paying me for,
And that's what they're going to
you know.
remember. That's right. And you don't want to get
Yeah,
to that point where you're that guy. It's like, oh, I heard he was good, or I remember him
yeah. I mean,
when.
I'm sure it happens to all of us eventually, and I guess you have to be prepared. One of my mentors was a man called Raymond here in Australia, and Adelaide, in fact, who was a manipulator, and he made the decision when to retire.
Mhm.
In fact, I did the last show with him here at the Festival Centre, which is like a big theatre complex here in Adelaide. And that was the last public show he did.
Hmm.
And he said, when I make a mistake and it's my fault, that's when I'll stop. So he stopped before that happened, which I think's
Brilliant.
amazing. I
Yeah.
don't think I'm going to be that brave. I think they're going to have to
Bring you off with a hook.
pull, yeah, bring me off with the hook. Yeah.
I want to touch on a few things that in your career, and going back to Charlie Chaplin for just a moment, then too. I remember Paul Romani was talking about. I think he had met an heir of Charlie Chaplin's, and have you also?
No, no, I, no, I haven't. I've been to Chaplin's house in Switzerland. The
Hmm.
museum there is astounding. It's one of the best theatrical museums I've ever been to. It's
Wow.
beautiful. You cry, you cry. There were moments in there when uh, I was watching. They had it's big. They've got Madame Tussauds quality statues there of Chaplin through different time periods,
Hmm.
and you can walk up and put your arm around him. It's
And take
unbelievable. Nobody
selfies.
stops you.
Huh.
It's just, yeah, and yeah, it's beautiful. But no, I haven't met any members of the family, um, but I know a number of people who have. Um, but my interest really is of that man on the screen.
Right.
That's the man I admire. So
And the
yeah,
museum you said was in Switzerland? Where in Zurich or where?
yeah, it's in where he retired to, and Versailles. I think you'll have to look it up. I could be wrong, but
Okay.
it's just it's his house. They've turned that into part museum. You can walk through some of it, but then there's a large building they've built. I look it up for the pictures. It's
Okay.
astounding.
Wow.
Yeah,
Well, speaking of,
even the beginning of it is really magical too. When you go there, I won't spoil what happens, but they show some films, and suddenly you're in the film, and it's just like
wow.
you're walking into a set that looks like, you know, one of the
Wow.
Chaplin sets. Beautiful.
I hope that I can see
And
that
there were
one day.
moments, yeah, yeah, yeah. Oh, you should. It's just and there was a moment in there where there was a number of screens in a row playing the same sequence
Uh-huh.
from a early film where he's making a cocktail, and I'd seen it before, of course, but watching it there in that moment, I went, "Wow, he's 27 years old, and he knows everything." You
Hmm.
really are watching a master at work, and just goosebump when I saw it. I just went, "Oh my God,
Yeah. And knowing what a career he was going to have in
I'm
front of him.
nothing."
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. But you know, it's that all that energy from that time in your country as well coming together in
Hmm.
the early teens and 20s in the 20th century. Amazing time of
Well,
industry and
an,
progress. Yeah.
another person that I believe that you had met when that was Queen Elizabeth. Is that right?
Oh yes, yes, yes. She
What was that like? I mean, was it a
well,
little
it's
bit
very
nervous performing for her and then going through the line, or tell me something about that?
no. It was really weird. It was when my hand shadows went viral, I guess, when those things were still possible on the internet
Hmm.
early on. Um, it sort of went around the world in about a week. I was actually at Magic Live
Okay.
in Vegas, and I went to check my emails. I hadn't been there for check it for a few days, and there were all these emails from your country first. It just sort of progressed its way around the world, the clip, because it was under, I think it was just over a megabyte, and people were sending it via email in those days. This is
Hmm.
2007, I think, and I literally got back to Australia, and within 4 days I was booked on the Late Show of it going up on the internet in New York with Letterman. I got back to Australia and I was invitation for the Royal Variety performance in the UK, and they said, "Oh, we're late in the day asking you. I hope you can come." Are you kidding? Get out of my way! And it was really nice because I could do the shadows really well, what I thought was really well then. Although I recently saw that performance on tape online, and I thought it was somebody else doing the hand shadows because I didn't think they were very good.
Oh,
Because
okay.
I've
You
got
advanced
nuts
since
anyway.
then.
Yeah. So the end story is you do the performance, and it was in Liverpool, the
Hmm.
Empire Theatre, which is an old musical variety theatre, beautiful. And you have to, when you finish your act, you bow to the audience and you turn and you bow to the box wherever the member of royalty is sitting. You can't see anything. And then at the end of the show, you all line up. Oh, the other good thing that happened on that show was Bon Jovi were on as well. And at the end of the show, we all sang Let It Be on stage in Liverpool.
Hmm.
I thought, wow, I really loved the Beatles when I was younger, so that's pretty. Um, and you stand the line, and the Queen comes along, and she shakes your hand, and she was really small. I thought, really quite small, and then she just said, "Oh, very entertaining," and then she moved off, and then the Duke was behind her, and he said, best song of the night." And I said, "I didn't even sing it." He said, "I know," and walked off, and then paid out Simon Cowell, from what I heard, which he was renowned for doing. But for me, it was interesting because Wayne Dobson is a big influence and a big. I admire him greatly, and he had done the Royal Variety performance, and I was just delighted that I could say, "Well, Wayne did one, and I got to do one as well," and it was interesting because it's something I never considered I'd ever do, you know.
Now, when you lined up and she came through and shook everyone's hands, were you on the stage after the rest of the audience had left, or is that how it
No,
worked?
I think the audience was still there. I think the
Oh,
audience was still there. And then about 2 months later, I was doing a job in London, and the choreographer of the show had booked me for that. And he said, "Oh, what about you? You got a standing ovation from Her Majesty." And I went, "Oh, I didn't know because you can't see anything."
and she's so
So
short.
and she's so short, she probably went like that,
Couldn't tell if she was standing or not, right?
over the box. She was tiny. I'm short.
Yeah.
I'm short. But yeah, amazing moment. It was
Wow.
great.
And I know that working with the Illusionists had to be fun. Did you tour with them outside of Australia or mainly just within okay.
No, I did I did a European tour. I did a tour of the States and I did Broadway as well with them. I
I
did
heard the Broadway
the
show was
Broadway.
just phenomenal.
Yeah, it was an amazing time. Jeff Hobson was the MC,
Hmm.
and he was incredible to watch. Every show he won. I
Hmm.
can't say that I won every show, but he won every show.
He can handle an audience, the palm of his hand
Oh, yes,
easily. He
master.
converts them.
Yes, yes, and he was a really nice man to me. I was having a little bit of difficulty in one of the routines, just with the structure of the show, and Jeff was really great. Just going, oh, maybe you could do that, and so it was
He's a
very
good
good.
magician, certainly as well, and could give some good advice, I would imagine.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and again, he loves variety acts, so
Hmm.
we would spend a lot of time watching videos of old entertainers
Right.
doing amazing acts.
You mentioned David Letterman a little bit earlier, and I know that I guess Steve Martin was on the same night that you were as well. And you had done that before you did the Royal Variety Show. So in meeting David Letterman and doing that, I don't recall that he invited you to come over and sit at the chair. I think he just kind of said thanks and you left.
Yeah, it was at the end of the show. They
Hmm.
put me on last. They were really nice to me, actually. I'd heard different things about Letterman, but I don't. What do I care? I'm just coming to do my shadows.
Right.
And the guy who had booked me, the talent guy, had set it up that I would run into Steve Martin as he came off, which was really. I said, "Oh wow, I just met Steve Martin." He said, "I know. I arranged that he would run into you," and so they were really nice to me. And and Letterman came over, and they said he won't come over.
Hmm.
He'll either stay at the desk if he doesn't like you. So he came over and that was really nice.
That he did get up and come over to you.
Yeah, he
You're
came
saying,
over.
yeah.
Yeah, we paid how much for that? No,
Well.
I don't know what he said.
Well, as far as the shadows go, was that something that you picked up then later in life? I mean, a lot of times I know there are shadow books that kids learn, like when they're prepubescent, it seems like, and you weren't involved with that so much in your early childhood, were you?
No, I used to. The only books I could get on magic were in the State Library here in Adelaide, and they were all like Amateur Magician's Handbook
Hmm.
and things of that nature. They're all antique books, really, and they all had hand shadows in them. And I'd always thought, oh, that would be. I'd never seen a hand shadow artist at that point. And then I was in Tasmania doing a support act for another magic show, a wonderful magician who was a performer here, illusionist called Ross Skivington. And I used to go visit this amateur magician up the road and talk to him. And I told him I thought hand shadows were good. And then when I left in my pigeonhole, there was the Nicola book on hand shadows.
Hmm.
And so I started playing with those. And I used to use a early version of Paper Moon from the 1920s. Say, it's only a paper moon when I was doing school shows, but it
Mhm.
never really made any sense to the children. I just really liked the song. And there was a chap in Australia called Steve Walker, who
I
was
remember
an
Steve.
ex.
He's since passed, but he was a
Yeah,
nice guy, very nice
yeah, he
guy.
was great.
He was a good
And
MC, as I recall, too.
very good, very funny man.
Hmm.
And he lived in Sydney. I live in Adelaide. That's like 2 states away. And out of the blue, I got a VHS tape. He sat down because he used to get all the variety shows from England sent over to him on videotape in those
Hmm.
days.
Hmm.
And he'd sat down and he put together 3 hours of variety acts. I had no idea how long that took him to dub those over. You can imagine going through shows.
Right.
And on there was a wonderful Indian shadowgrapher. And that was the first time I saw hand shadows move. And I realized that, they're puppets. They're not just shapes. And because I'd done some puppetry as well as the mime technique, I found them a natural fit. I found them, yeah, and so I just started playing. Then somebody suggested using "What a Wonderful World," a doctor friend of mine, and I thought, it was such a, at that point when I started, it was such a corny song. People were using it for everything but "What a Wonderful World," and then by the time it ended up on the internet, I'd been doing it for a number of years, so it had evolved enough. But the only original hand shadow in that act is the baby's hand, the little baby's hand that comes
Yes.
down,
hmm
and that's my little son's hand. That's what I think of when I do that, is when he was a little baby.
Little baby. Right.
But the rest are from those old books, really.
I know there are a few other shadowography artists. Do you exchange tricks between shadowographers the way the magicians do card tricks and
Well,
things?
here's the thing, Scott. I don't watch other
Oh.
shadowographers.
Hmm.
I watched. My thought was I didn't want to be a shadowgrapher. I just wanted to see if I could do it.
Sure.
You see, and although I've done other pieces with shadows, it's the Wonderful World is what I still get booked for. So I don't consider myself a shadowgrapher as such,
hmm
but looking at a lot of other people's acts, I'm now pretty good at what I do.
I think so. You're brilliant.
Yeah, but it's because I've been doing it a long time, and
Mm.
I've been able to. I think also I started cutting silhouettes because in those old Vernon books we know
Right.
the books we see the silhouettes and that, and I thought I'd give that a go, and I found that greatly improved my hand shadows because that gave me a sense of proportion,
hmm
and uh, and I don't want to be influenced by anybody else. It sounds silly, but I don't want to see somebody else's shadows and go, oh, gee, I could do that bit.
But I
And I
wonder
know that I already,
if
pardon,
sometimes
sorry.
there are other shadowographers who may watch your act and say, "Hey, he's doing my thing," or I do that rabbit, or whatever it is. And even though that is something you've developed on your own, I mean, it's like comedians, I think, that has a joke and then it appears in someone else's routine. They say, "Hey, that you must have stolen that from me." Well, no, it was just independently come up with.
Well, the shadows are all basic shapes, and they're all in those old books. If you know your history of magic, you'll find them.
hmm
And so the secret is, what are you going to do with them? It's the same as like making a coin vanish. Well, that's okay, but how is your what is it that you want to say with it? What is it that you want people to feel? And my
hmm
mime teacher always said, be human. She said, if you're human, you can work anywhere in the world. If you're just, as she called it, blah blah, which I think meant just sort of like sh- uh, not shallow, but a flash act might be a way to describe it. I'm not sure. Um, and so when I finally did the shadows, it was the first time that I really felt something, and I have not been able to really find that in my magic, because with the hand shadows, I get to watch it every time, and I try every time I get to see those shapes. Whereas with magic, you're hoping that your angles are correct, and you're hoping what they see.
Oh,
If
I
you've
see the
done your
difference.
homework,
Yes.
yeah.
You can
Whereas
see
this,
it the
I
way
can
the
physically
audience
see.
sees it.
Yeah, yeah. I'm just going to grab my little shadow book and tell you the name of that Indian. I'm in the same room. Keep talking.
Okay. Sure. That's fine. No, I was thinking also about the Chinese acts that are shadow acts as well, and I have seen those where they have cutouts like of a dragon or a lady or whatever in a dress, and they would be on sticks and they kind of move around behind the scenes or something. That's a whole different kind of shadow act than what you're doing with your hands, of course. And
Yes.
and when you're talking also about adding those, that's the kind of thing that you add in when you have a little cutout, I assume, to interact with your hand.
Yes, you can. I used to be against that. I thought that was kind of like cheating when I saw it in the old books. But I realised why you do it, because if a shadow person's doing a program, and they might have done a 10-minute act or whatever it was in vaudeville, they need to fill that time.
Yes.
And so, so I've got the name, Mr. Prasanna Rao. I think, and I hope Charlie Fry worked with him. I hope I've said that correctly. And he was the master. And if you could find him, you'll say, "Oh, that's very similar to Raymond's there." Well, it's because that's the man I saw, and he was a master. He is he passed away, unfortunately, but he made the shadows live. And a lot of people, when I see them, because in the books, when you see that, they're just static images. They
Right.
don't really. Some of the books will say, you have to impart the feeling of the animal, but many of them just will. And I think, as I say, I don't consider myself a shadowgrapher, because shadographers, they do hundreds of shadows. They're masters with their hands. I do what I can do, but a lot of them, I find the shadows dead when they do it. I don't see them as living animals. And I think that's one thing that I try to impart with the animals, is some movement. They may not move exactly as those animals move, but at least I feel that they're living in some way.
Where a rabbit might scratch behind its ear or something like that, you mean?
Yeah, and just isolating the different parts of the shadow to move, so that it doesn't move as one lump. The head moves independently of the body, just as what happens in nature. So, and I've seen, and so a lot of I saw a lot of different acts over the years, just because people send me their tapes, and now I say, they say, "Would you like to see my act?" I say, "Well, look, I'd rather you keep it to yourself, because I don't want to be influenced." But but many I'd seen from a number of years ago, their shadows were quite primitive, and I didn't feel that there was a lot of love in their work. It's like when you watch a magician and it's cold as they perform. I would rather watch somebody like Danny Kaye, or something who has some warmth about them and some love of humanity, at least able to project that. And the same with the shadows. A lot of them just end up just being shapes. Here's another shape I can make. Here's another shape I can make. It's like people producing cards. That's great. But what am I supposed to think?
Yeah, after
You're
a
clever.
while.
Okay, I've got that. You're clever. That's great. Now,
Right.
what's the story now? And it could be just a display of cleverness. That's fine as well. But at least make that decision.
So that's why with the Louis Armstrong and it's a wonderful world. That's
Yep,
something that is
that song.
emotional,
Yeah,
And what about
yeah.
the using the rights to that, the ASCAP or whatever? Do you have problems like with that getting taken off of YouTube? No?
No, oh, it did get taken off. I never posted it on YouTube, so I'm sure people have made a lot of money, as they do. And now it's getting more and more people are now retaking people's work and then commenting on it or something like this to make money off their work. I just find it bizarre. It's a bizarre world. No, what happened was, if I perform on TV or in a theatre, if it's on television, then that television station is responsible for the rights to get permission, pay the necessary fees. When we perform it in a theatre, we pay we call it APRA, which is the same as what you were saying. The rights, you pay a percentage of the income from the show goes towards whatever music you've used. But what did happen was one of the nicest things that happened. There were many nice things that happened with the shadows. Was the chap who co-wrote it, Mr. Weiss, was still alive in New York, and he sent me the sheet music with Louis Armstrong on the cover.
Wow.
To the world's most wonderful puppeteer, and I had people who worked with Louis Armstrong write to me and say he would have loved it, and wow, because I never intended. Yeah, for me the initial shape is not necessarily Louis Armstrong that I do, but the beautiful thing about shadows, and that's is that people see what they want to see in them. And I found when I first started, and I wasn't that good, I used to get more reaction from the shadows than I do now. And I think it's a bit, if and Tommy Wonder talked about this, the less you show, the more they see. Covered magic, for example. He talks about covered magic. Covering your hand with a silk, and we see the silk moving. You have to start using your imagination. What is that? And the same with the shadows. The reason they work and why mime, illusionary mime works, is because the spectator has to become actively involved, working out what's happening.
Right.
And when they see it, so when people see the rabbit or they see the invisible wall, their mind gets a little reward, and now they've activated their imagination. Whereas if you spell everything out for somebody, there's nothing left. If you think about Hitchcock, it's the handle of the door turning is more frightening than seeing the grotesque creature coming through, or whatever that might be.
Good point.
And I think that's something magic, you see performers do it in magic. Some people are very good at that. But it's the fashion of fast visual magic. That's great. But I think it's a bit like being hit on the head. Eventually it doesn't hurt anymore. And same with if everything's flash, 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 it's astounding, but it seems less special each time it happens to the spectator.
That makes sense.
So I think maybe, and I'm not always capable of doing what I don't always do what I'm hoping, what I'm saying, but I really believe that covered magic is something that still works. It works very well. Don't spell everything out to you. Probably maybe why mentalism works too, I guess. People have to imagine more. I don't know. But I think people like to play. The audience
that makes sense.
To play.
That's why abstract art is enjoyed by so many people, because it's what you see in that picture.
Yeah, your mind has to make a decision about it, or what does it make you feel?
Right.
And much more interesting, if you think about it, a shape forming under a cloth, for example, just as that example.
Right.
What is that thing? What is it?
There's a mystery.
And so, it's what's in the box idea,
Good point.
It's a very strong thing, and very underused, and it's just not fashionable, I guess.
I remember seeing an act, I believe, of yours with pool balls and the pool cues.
Yes.
Do you still do that act?
No, I put together the act, the 8-ball tango.
Yes, music was great.
Because, my friend Stuart wrote that. In fact, he found the angle on it. I'd commissioned him to write the music, and we went to a pool hall and we recorded all the noises of the pool balls, getting hit. And I thought, it's going to be really cool. And then I was running around doing shows, and I rang him up and I said, how's it going? He said, they sound like castanets. I think I'm going to go with a Spanish theme. And I went, that doesn't sound very cool. but then I was wise enough to let him go for it. He's a very good musician and had a good sense of humor. And really, if you think about traditional booyah balls, you have to stand to the side like a flamingo dancer or like a tango. And that's really what he found, and it sort of justified those strange positions you have to be in with your hands full profile on the side.
Yeah.
But it was a great project to put together, and I put it together because I was finding I was doing less and less sleight of hand at that time. But in Australia, the venues I was working were not proscenium march. We don't have variety shows the same as you do in your country or in Europe. So I never really got to perform it very often in Australia.
Too bad. I thought maybe you had that as a competition act or something.
I did do it at FISM in Dresden, but at the same time I found out that I was going to be on World's Greatest Magic, thanks to Peter Ravine, actually. Peter was always a great supporter of Australians, and I didn't develop it as a competition act. I developed it just because something I felt I had to do.
Yeah. To try to get back into the manipulation and everything.
And make sense of it. Turn those balls back into billiard balls. And in fact, I I'm, this is funny. When I did the World's Greatest Magic, because that was recorded in Las Vegas, the balls I was using then were wooden balls that I bought for 60 cents each, and the shell I cast from fiberglass. So the whole set probably cost me about $10. And I was performing. Rick Thomas was on the same show, a young Rick Thomas, and he had like six dancing girls in this giant illusion, and I felt like the poor cousin. Really did.
With $10 worth of billiard balls.
$10 worth of billiard balls, and I remember this chap coming up to me saying, "Oh, what type of balls are you using? Are they, Fakini?" And I'd never seen a Fakini set. And I said, "Oh no, there's 60-cent balls that I made myself." He sort of looked at them in disgust and walked off. And the show was never shown in Australia for quite some time, and they forgot to send me a tape of the recording. And it wasn't a routine I was doing regular, and I got quite intimidated when I was there, seeing all these amazing. They're all going, "Oh, where are you going next?" "Oh, I'm going off to Europe to work in somewhere and something else." "And where are you going?" "I'm going back to Adelaide." Do a school show on Monday, I think.
Yeah.
But when I did see it finally back about a year and a half later, before I saw it, I was very pleased the way they'd edited it. And now when I look at it, I'm quite proud of it.
I thought it looked great, and the music was great. I was trying to find that music someplace just to listen to that during the daytime. Whenever I'm on the computer, I just think that there are certain songs that I like to hear, and I've thought about that from time to time. It's just I like the rhythm and the way that sounds, but apparently you're saying it was custom made for you. It's not commercially available.
And that's what was great, because when I got to the show, a lot of people had their music changed because of copyright.
You didn't have to worry about that anywhere you go. Yeah.
No, they could, and so it's still, and that's what happens sometimes with the Illusionists, were that they wouldn't, because obviously it's a money-making machine, they don't want to pay copyright on that music. So with my jacket routine, instead of using the song Sway, they had a sound-alike written, beautifully written, all orchestrated, but it never had the same impact because they lost a layer of parody on it.
Yes.
So that's always a danger. So, and also there's another great example with the music. If I hadn't got somebody else to come in and add their input with the music, I would never have had that routine, and I would never have been on that TV show.
Yeah.
And
ripple effects. You never know what one thing is going to cause something else to happen on down the road.
Be brave enough to bring somebody else in, and listen to a magician. My friend Stuart Day, who wrote the music, isn't a magician, but he had been an actor and a great sense of humour and a great knowledge of music. And that combination, and he really wrote it like to the video that I'd given him. So he Mickey Mouse the action, if you like, is what they call it with the music. Yeah.
Wow.
So get out there, find those people that can input into your work, and make it grander, make it bigger,
and take your act to the next level. Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, as we start to wrap up, I was going to say I appreciate the time that you've given us here, early in the morning over there for you and later in the day for me, as we're so far apart in our different time zones. So the name of my podcast is called the Magic Word Podcast. So I always like to close by asking my guests what it is that's important to you. What is your philosophy of life? It's not necessarily a word, but it can be a phrase.
I tell you, the biggest advice ever is be human. Just be human. Just be a human being. I'd rather watch a human being on stage than somebody playing a character.
Okay.
Be yourself. It's a hard thing to realize that you're enough.
Yep. And no one is a better you than you.
Although I have seen some that are.
Okay. That makes sense too. Raymond, thank you very much. I appreciate your time.
My pleasure.
So for the Magic Word Podcast, that was Raymond Crowe. This is Scotty out. Thank you again, Ray, for being on the Magic Word podcast this week. And I encourage others, if you want to see more of his videos, perhaps you can go find them on YouTube, or if you go to themagicwordpodcast.com, I have got some links there that you can watch some of the videos then as well, plus see some of the photos and learn a little bit more about Ray. He is quite an interesting gentleman. And as I said in the title of this episode, what a wonderful life that he has lived. It is continuing to live, and he likes to share that with others then as well. So again, check out the magicwordpodcast.com for this week's blog. And also you can go back into the archives and find everything back to the very beginning, back in 2011. So here we are up into the 800s, and we are still going strong. So thank you all very much for listening. Thank you for subscribing to the pod letter. And thank you also for subscribing and liking this YouTube channel then as well. So you guys are great, and I wouldn't be here if I didn't have you listening. So thanks for tuning in from week to week. So until next week, stay well, get booked, and remember that it's a hard thing to realize that you're enough. So just be human. This is Scotty out.